The room went completely silent the moment the phone rang on speaker. 12 guests sat frozen around that dinner table, forks halfway to their mouths, staring at a woman in a plain gray apron standing at the head of the table, a woman none of them expected to see there at all. In 18 days, this family was supposed to be celebrating a wedding. Instead, in front of everyone she loved, one woman inside that mansion was about to lose everything she had spent months carefully building, and it was not the woman everyone in that room assumed. To understand how a housekeeper's apron ended up on the floor of a Connecticut dining room, and why an engagement collapsed in front of a room full of witnesses, you have to go back 18 days, to a cold Tuesday morning when a stranger walked through the staff entrance of that very same mansion, and nobody thought to ask who she really was. On that cold Tuesday morning, a woman in a plain gray uniform stood at the staff entrance of the mansion, a single suitcase resting beside her feet. The security guard studied her identification twice, uneasy for a reason he could not quite name, unconvinced that this quiet, gray-haired woman was who her paperwork claimed her to be. He had no way of knowing that within 18 days, everything about this household would change because of her, or that the quiet woman standing in front of him was about to become the most important person inside that mansion, without a single member of the family recognizing her face. So who was this woman, and why was she willing to disappear from her own life to clean floors inside a house she had never been invited to work in? What did she already suspect about the woman engaged to marry into this family? And what would it take, in 18 days, to prove she was right? By the end of this story, you will know exactly who walked through that gate, and exactly what she was willing to risk to protect the people she loved most. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand why this quiet stranger was willing to trade a life of extraordinary wealth for a housekeeper's uniform, you have to know who she really was. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore, majority owner of Whitmore Industries, and the mother of the very man whose wedding was now 18 days away. And you have to go back more than 3 decades, to a gas station off a quiet highway in rural Ohio, to understand why she trusted her own instincts more than almost anyone else's opinion in the world. She was 29 years old when her husband died, left with a mountain of debt and a 5-year-old son named Julian to raise on her own. She worked 2 jobs at once for years, folding laundry at a dry cleaner by day and managing that small gas station by night, saving every spare dollar until she had enough to buy the property outright. From there, she built something larger, then larger again, until the gas station became a chain, and the chain became an empire that stretched across manufacturing, logistics, and real estate. Through every stage of that climb, she carried one rule with her, and she repeated it to Julian so often that he could recite it in his sleep: you can tell everything about a person by how they treat someone who can't do anything for them. She had no idea yet how soon she would need to test that rule inside her own son's home. Julian grew up watching his mother apply that rule to everyone she met, from board members to the janitors who cleaned her offices at midnight. By the time he turned 34, he was running much of the company himself, a serious, hard-working man who had inherited his mother's discipline but very little of her free time. He worked long hours, traveled constantly, and rarely allowed himself to slow down long enough to build a life outside of the company that bore his family's name. So when he met Sabrina Cole at a charity gala 8 months earlier, something in him finally softened. She was warm, quick-witted, and seemed to understand him in a way few people ever had. Within weeks they were inseparable, and within months he had proposed, certain that he had finally found the one person willing to love him rather than his last name. He had no idea his own mother was about to see something in that woman he could not. To everyone who met her, Sabrina appeared to be exactly what she seemed. She charmed Julian's board members over dinner, posed for engagement photos that ran in a regional lifestyle magazine, and spoke about their future together with a warmth that convinced almost everyone in the family, including Eleanor at first. But one evening, during a quiet family dinner at the mansion, a young waiter accidentally spilled a small amount of water near Sabrina's dress. For less than a second, her expression shifted into something cold and sharp, an expression aimed directly at a stranger who could do absolutely nothing for her. Just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by an easy laugh and a gracious wave of her hand. Julian never noticed. The rest of the table never noticed. But Eleanor, sitting quietly across from her, saw all of it, and she never forgot it. Eleanor said nothing that night. She smiled through dessert, complimented the wedding planning, and drove home in silence. But the moment she stepped through her own front door, she picked up the phone and called Marcus, the one employee inside Julian's household she trusted completely, a man who had managed the family's properties for nearly 20 years and who had known Eleanor since before Julian was born. She told him what she needed, and she told him it could not wait. 2 weeks later, Eleanor Whitmore disappeared from public view entirely. Her assistant told the office she was traveling. Her friends were told she needed rest. In truth, she was preparing to walk back through her son's front gate as someone else entirely, a quiet, unremarkable housekeeper that nobody would think twice about. On her first morning inside the mansion as Eleanor learned more about Sabrina Cole in 6 hours than she had in the previous 8 months. She watched Sabrina scold a housekeeper named Rosa over a wrinkled tablecloth, her voice sharp and clipped, threatening to have her removed from the household if it happened again. The moment Julian's footsteps echoed down the hallway, Sabrina's entire posture changed, her voice softening into the warm, easy tone everyone in the family knew so well. Eleanor had seen this exact performance once before, from the other side of a dinner table. She had never expected to witness it this closely, standing a few feet away with a laundry basket in her hands, invisible to the one person in the room who mattered most to her. A few days later, while cleaning the private study Sabrina used for wedding planning, Eleanor overheard a phone call that stopped her in place. Sabrina's voice, low and hurried, drifted through the half-open door. "We just need him to sign before the wedding, then it won't matter what happens after that." Eleanor stood perfectly still, gripping a stack of folded linens, straining to hear more before a floorboard creaked beneath her. Sabrina's head turned sharply toward the doorway, and for a long moment neither woman moved. Then Sabrina ended the call abruptly and asked, in a voice far too casual, whether anyone had been standing outside her study. Eleanor answered simply that she was just finishing the linens, and walked away before her hands could betray how fast her heart was beating. That evening, Eleanor found Rosa crying quietly in the small staff kitchen, still shaken from being humiliated earlier that day. Eleanor sat beside her, said very little, and simply listened, the way she used to listen to her own employees decades earlier when she was building her company from nothing. Rosa wiped her eyes and said something Eleanor would carry with her for the rest of this story. "I just wish someone with real power in this house actually saw us, instead of looking straight through us like we're furniture." Eleanor did not tell her who she really was. She only nodded, squeezed her hand, and promised her, in a voice Rosa mistook for simple kindness, that someone was going to see her very soon. By her 9th day in the house, Sabrina had grown suspicious of the quiet new housekeeper who seemed to appear in rooms at exactly the wrong moment. She pulled Marcus aside and demanded that Ellen be let go immediately, claiming she made the household uncomfortable. Marcus, calm as always, promised to look into it, and then quietly did nothing at all, buying Eleanor whatever time she still needed. That same afternoon, while organizing files inside the study Sabrina insisted on supervising personally, Eleanor came across a folder that did not belong to the woman everyone believed they knew. Inside were documents bearing a different name, tied to a different city, describing a pattern that looked far less like romance and far more like a plan that had been carried out before. Later that same day, Sabrina cornered Eleanor alone in a narrow hallway, studying her face with an intensity that made the air between them feel thick with unspoken accusation. "There's something familiar about you," Sabrina said slowly, tilting her head. "Have we met somewhere before this?" Eleanor kept her voice steady and her eyes low, insisting she simply had one of those common faces, and Sabrina seemed almost convinced, right up until the moment Julian's car pulled into the driveway and the conversation was forced to end. One more question, one more careful look, and years of careful discipline nearly unraveled in a single hallway. Eleanor understood then that she could not wait for the wedding rehearsal. Whatever she was going to do, it needed to happen soon, and it needed to happen where Sabrina could not simply talk her way out of it. 2 days after that hallway encounter, Eleanor found something while sorting through laundry left out overnight, a second phone hidden inside the lining of a garment bag, a phone Sabrina did not carry openly around the house. She did not dare unlock it, but she memorized the model, and later that evening she described it to Marcus in careful detail. Marcus, who had spent 2 decades quietly solving problems for the Whitmore family without ever needing to be asked twice, told her he knew someone who could help them understand exactly who Sabrina Cole had been calling, and why she needed a phone nobody else in the house was supposed to know existed. On her one afternoon off that week, Sabrina told the household she was visiting a spa 2 towns over. Instead, Marcus's contact watched her walk into a small diner just off the highway and sit across from a man named Daniel Reyes, a name that meant nothing to anyone in the Whitmore family yet. From a distance, their conversation looked tense rather than romantic. Sabrina kept glancing toward the door, her arms folded tightly across her chest, and at one point she appeared to wipe her eyes with the back of her hand. For a moment, Eleanor allowed herself to consider a very different explanation than the one she had been building. What if Sabrina was not the architect of whatever was happening, but someone caught inside it, frightened of a man she could not simply walk away from? That doubt did not last long. Within 2 days, Marcus's contact returned with information on Daniel Reyes that changed the shape of the entire story. He had no criminal record, no outstanding debts, and no obvious connection to anyone dangerous. What he did have was a business registered jointly with a woman using yet another name entirely, a name that matched a property Sabrina had quietly sold 6 months before meeting Julian at that charity gala. Eleanor sat with that information for a long time before she allowed herself to accept what it meant. Sabrina was not being controlled by Daniel Reyes. She and Daniel had been partners, in every sense of the word, long before Julian Whitmore ever walked into that ballroom. For one difficult evening, Eleanor considered simply telling her son everything she knew and letting him decide what to do with it. She stood outside his study door with her hand raised to knock, still dressed as Ellen, still carrying a tray she no longer remembered picking up. But she stopped herself, certain that Julian, still deeply in love, would need more than a mother's word and a stranger's phone records to believe that the woman he was about to marry had built their entire relationship on a plan. She needed proof large enough that Sabrina herself would not be able to talk her way around it, in front of the one audience that mattered most. 3 days before the engagement dinner, Eleanor found what she needed. Buried inside a locked drawer in Sabrina's study, beneath a folder labeled simply as personal, were bank statements showing accounts opened under 2 previous identities, each one closed within weeks of a broken engagement, each one considerably larger than it had been before. The dates lined up perfectly with the 2 names Eleanor had already uncovered, and with a wedding, in another state, that had been called off only 9 days before it was scheduled to happen. There was no coercion in these documents, no evidence that Sabrina Cole had ever been anyone's victim. There was only a pattern, carefully repeated, and very nearly successful a 3rd time. When the night of the engagement dinner finally arrived, the mansion filled with family, friends, and members of the press, the celebration meant to mark the final countdown to the wedding. Ellen moved quietly through the room refilling glasses, an ordinary housekeeper doing ordinary work, while Eleanor Whitmore waited for exactly the right moment. That moment arrived when Sabrina's phone, left carelessly on the table beside her, lit up with an incoming call and connected to speaker by accident. The same low, hurried voice from the study filled the dining room, asking whether the signature was secured yet, and whether the money could be moved before anything became community property. Conversation around the table stopped completely. Forks paused midair. And for the first time since he had proposed, Julian's expression changed from confusion into something far colder. Eleanor set down the pitcher of water she was carrying, reached up, and untied the apron from around her waist, letting it fall over the back of an empty chair. Gasps moved through the room as the guests slowly realized that the quiet housekeeper standing among them was Eleanor Whitmore herself. She walked to the head of the table, placed the folder she had found in Sabrina's study directly in front of her son, and told the room, calmly and without raising her voice, exactly what she had spent the last 18 days confirming. A different name, a different city, a man named Daniel Reyes, and a pattern of engagements that had ended just before a wedding, and just after a substantial transfer of money. The maid who had spent 2 weeks scrubbing this mansion's floors was, in fact, the one person in the room with the least to hide. For a long moment, Sabrina said nothing at all, and when she finally spoke, the warmth that had defined her for 8 months was completely gone. What replaced it was sharp, defensive, and unmistakably honest for the first time since anyone at that table had known her. She did not deny the documents. She did not deny the phone call. She simply looked at Julian, still expecting, even in that moment, that charm alone might be enough to smooth this over one final time. It was not. Julian stood, removed the ring from her hand himself, and asked her to leave the property before the evening ended. There was no shouting, no scene beyond what had already unfolded, only the quiet, absolute finality of a decision that could not be undone. Before Sabrina had even reached the front gate, Eleanor turned to Rosa, still standing near the kitchen doorway in stunned silence, and repeated back to her, word for word, what Rosa had said in that small staff kitchen only days earlier. "I just wish someone with real power in this house actually saw us." Eleanor told her, and everyone else still seated at that table, that she had heard her, and that starting that week, every member of the household staff would receive new contracts, better pay, and protections that had never existed under this roof before. It was not framed as charity. It was framed as correction, a debt Eleanor felt the family had quietly owed for far too long. Julian, still absorbing everything he had just learned about the woman he almost married, looked at his mother with an expression somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. He admitted, quietly, that he had stopped paying close enough attention to the people closest to him, including the housekeepers who moved through his home every single day, and including his own mother's judgment, which he had underestimated more than once over the years. In the months that followed, Julian began greeting every member of his household staff by name, something he had rarely done before. Some who watched closely noticed that he lingered a little longer in conversation with Rosa than with anyone else, though neither of them said much about it, at least not yet. Eleanor never framed what she did as revenge, and she never described herself as suspicious by nature. She simply repeated the same rule she had lived by since that gas station in Ohio, the rule she had taught her son before he could even tie his own shoes: you can tell everything about a person's character by how they treat someone who can't do anything for them. It turned out that lesson was not only meant for Julian. It applied to Eleanor as well, and to every person who ever sat across a dinner table from someone they thought they knew completely. So we'll leave you with this question. If you had been sitting at that table the night the phone rang, would you have caught the warning signs before Eleanor did, or would Sabrina Cole have fooled you just as completely as she fooled everyone else in that room? Tell us in the comments what moment gave Sabrina away for you first, whether it was the flash of anger toward that waiter, the phone call overheard through a half-open door, or the folder Eleanor found hidden inside that study. And if you enjoyed this story, wait until you hear what happens in our next one, where the person hiding a secret identity isn't the fiancé at all, but someone standing even closer to the family. Subscribe now so you never miss it, and we'll see you in the next story.